Inscryption is a roguelite card game with unsettling horror elements that's far more than what it first seems. Like most roguelites, you learn more mechanics with each run you do. First, you learn that you can get up and inspect your environment. You aren't restricted to this tabletop. Then you discover that there's clues throughout this cabin which aid you in your progression. You also learn that with each run you can make a death card that will help you on future runs. And then, when you finally complete a run, Oh. What? Inscryption is an interactive film game in which you watch clips made by social media influencer named Luke Carter as he uncovers a dark mystery surrounding a familiar trading card game. There's different clues hidden in the clips, and it appears they're all taken from Luke's personal video camera. They're dated, and appear to have a progression to them in which Luke gets deeper into this mystery. Once you finish one set of clips, then you move on to... Oh. Okay. Inscryption is a top-down, 8-bit adventure game using card battles as a combat mechanic. You're able to choose a starting deck with its own unique mechanics, then complete battles and collect more as you speak to the residents of this small island-like world. Each zone has its own boss, and beating each boss acts as a milestone that activates a pillar of light in the center of the islands. Defeat all 4 bosses and... you get the idea. I imagine that was redundant for anyone who's played Inscryption, but I tend to start constructing a script in my head while I play a game. That intro was pretty much my exact thought process as I was playing through Inscryption. However, its unreliable genre is also the reason that I love this game. If you couldn't tell already from my channel, I'm a huge fan of subversive horror games, and Inscryption delivers on every level for that craving. I know I've only covered horror games so far, but restricting Inscryption to that genre doesn't do it enough justice. I think it succeeds as a horror experience and a meta experience, but most importantly, I was never bored by it once. This is probably one of the most important things a game can accomplish. Before I get to the meat of this video, I want to point a couple of things out. First, I know that some people actually dislike Inscryption because of its nature. They purchased the game in anticipation of solely playing a horror-themed roguelike card game, only to get at least 3 different experiences they didn't ask for and maybe didn't enjoy as much. While I disagree that the jumps in gameplay and narrative don't enhance the experience, I do think it's a fair point that some may be taken aback and upset by its unpredictable nature. To which I would point out that the officially recognized and free Casey's mod solves this problem completely. It both makes the first act of the game the main focus and creates more content for it. I'd argue that the first act of the game, even disregarding the mod, is more fleshed out and more interesting to play than existing counterpart games like Hand of Fate. Second, I'm not going to be going over the ARG in this video. I'll be covering some of the clues that are included in the main game, but not how they contribute to the ARG as a whole. This is because its inclusion would inflate the length of this video, and I plan to cover ARGs on their own in the future. With that being said, I'm going to go through the whole game now, and let me just say, I love Inscryption. So let's dissect it. Welcome to the lab. Before even beginning the game, some things can be inferred from the game's title. On first playthrough, it just seems like a clever twist on the word inscription, just spelled uniquely. As you progress through, its name garners more context. The 4 NPCs in the game are named scribes, which can be linked to their ability to inscribe information onto the cards you use. Scrying is the act of looking into something with significance, like a crystal ball, in hopes of receiving a message to interpret or some kind of hint about the future. There's no relevance to fortune-telling here, but the scribes are definitely more aware and inquisitive than your typical video game NPC. This game is pretty meta. Meta in the way that you're playing a game while you're controlling someone that's playing a game, against opponents aware that they're a part of a game, while the game itself contains dark secrets. While this concept can seem exhausting, it's something that developer Daniel Mullins has done before with the game Pony Island. I played it back in the year it was released, and though my time spent with it was short, it left an impact on me and I still remember it to this day. Inscryption is like the polished, detailed, expanded older sibling to Pony Island. It strikes the perfect balance of being eerily meta while not getting too convoluted. With that, let's see what elements of each part of the game make it stand out from other indie horror titles. The game begins with someone talking over what seems like video camera footage before you can even reach the title screen.
trying to figure out what's on this thing.
Though it becomes easy to forget, you're technically playing as this person and viewing footage through his camera for the entirety of the game. When the actual game starts, the ambience is captured perfectly, with silence followed by an eerily loud creaking sound as a pair of eyes slowly open in the dark in front of you. This is Leshy, as you come to find out later. It can be inferred that this game hasn't been played in a long time, and Leshy wastes no time beginning to play again. A tutorial commences where you learn the basics of gameplay. It revolves around using creatures to get your opponent's scale to tip. Use sacrifices as costs to play stronger creatures. Leshy and your creatures can block each other and have a variety of different abilities. Those are the basics, but what's important for now is that the Stoat card has speaking text appear when it's sacrificed. This is immediately intriguing and leads into how the true progression of this game works. Upon drawing the Stoat card again, he begins to talk to you directly and drops small hints on how to begin your escape from Leshy's cabin. During your first run, you're told that you can get up and walk about the cabin. Leshy becomes oddly cool about it too, not really minding how much time you spend away from the table, knowing you'll eventually come back to keep playing. There's a few puzzles around the cabin, some optional and some required to progress through the story. What's noticeable about the progression ones is that the characters in the cards, and the game itself, will drop hints for you on how to progress if it takes you too long to figure them out. While I do think some may dislike having a hint forced onto them, I personally appreciate them, as when it takes me too long to figure out a puzzle, it inevitably leads me to having to resort to Googling it to save time. Back at the table, the true flesh of the game becomes visible. You learn about totems, survivor camps, buff transfers, and trials. There's a really sharp, effective, and solid foundation here that's expanded on and a great challenge in the Casey's mod expansion. But in the base game, there's things here that aren't present in the mod that can completely break the first act in terms of challenge. I'll talk more about that in a second, but what really makes this act interesting is the atmosphere, which Leshy contributes to greatly. He's a pretty good dungeon master. The way he describes the obstacles you come across really adds to the atmosphere, along with his brief descriptions of each creature when you encounter them for the first time. He's at his best when he's portraying characters for boss encounters. He dons a mask, embodies their persona, and switches up the atmosphere and music. It really does make the boss fights with the Prospector, Angler, and Trapper feel like real encounters. Other elements contribute to the horror theme of this act as well. As weird as it sounds, I was giddy when I discovered that the pliers and the knife are used to sacrifice parts of your own body to improve your odds of winning. It's like Saw, except it makes more sense. It also reminded me of the Blackjack minigame from Resident Evil 7. There's just something about your life being at stake when playing a simple card game that's so morbidly interesting to me. The animations and placements of cards are so incredibly crisp and smooth, and that remains consistent in Acts 1 and 3. So the pattern continues. With each death, you can craft a death card that will more than likely make your next run easier if you encounter it. Besides the death cards, there's actually a lot of ways to break the gameplay in Act 1 to the point where you're unstoppable. In my case, I got a squirrel totem with the rabbit sigil on it. This means every time I played a free squirrel card, I got a rabbit for free, acting as another sacrifice and allowing me to play my stronger beasts way faster. This led to the rest of the run being a breeze, especially with the death cards I found, leading me to beating Act 1 in only about 6 runs. I think this amount of runs works for the pacing of the game, but I think the game could have dragged out Act 1 a bit longer and gotten away with it, since for me it felt like I broke the game shortly after learning all of its rules. Maybe slightly increasing the amount of time in between hints that are dropped for the player could work more for the illusion that this is Inscryption in its entirety. Once you've found all the 3 talking cards throughout the cabin, aka the other scribes as you'll soon find out, you'll be able to finish a run and move on to the next act. The final and most challenging boss you face in order to finish Act 1 is Leshy himself. He gives himself 3 lives instead of the usual 2, which is kind of a dick move, though thematically appropriate for a final battle. You need to be prepared to face either of the 3 boss mechanics from before at random in the first phase, though the real highlight of this fight for me are the second and third phases. In the second phase, the death cards you made yourself are turned against you. And in the third, Leshy literally turns the moon into a card to fight for him. Once Leshy is defeated, we're reminded of who we've really been playing as this whole time. So before I move on, what's important to glean from Act 1 is that the game can act independently of its code. This cleverly adds a fourth wall kind of horror that games like Doki Literature Club captured so well. So from here on out, you're really not sure what to expect, and that's a great feeling to have in any horror or mystery game. Though it's easy to forget, you're technically playing as Luke Carter the entirety of the main story of Inscryption. You're given subtle reminders about his presence during the gameplay, but the meat of his story occurs in between breaks and the different acts. I'm going to cover all of it now at once for the sake of pacing in this video. Luke Carter is a YouTuber that does card openings for content. At a garage sale, he comes across physical cards used for a discontinued card game named Inscryption. Upon opening some packs, he encounters coordinates that lead him to a forest in which he discovers a floppy disk with a digital version of Inscryption on it. It feels very old-school creepypasta, it's very Ben Drowned, but what's unique about this is that you're actually experiencing said haunted game in this story. So though the concept is already familiar, its execution is really unique. As he progresses through the game, Luke tries to uncover its origins by directly contacting the creators of the physical card game Gamefuna, whom he finds out really doesn't want him playing this game. Sending someone on their behalf to his house is a threat almost. He learns that the person who slipped the coordinates into the pack, named Casey, used to work at Gamefuna, and died one evening while working due to fire-related complications. As the mystery gets deeper, Luke starts to slowly go more insane. And as it's uncovered that the entire game is used to cover up the existence of an old data file, Luke becomes a part of the game itself and inspects the contents of the data. Whatever he finds there was so horrible that he immediately destroys the drive and calls a private investigator. During the phone call, the same woman from before arrives at his house and kills him. While I don't dislike the inclusion of this character and his involvement in the story, I can't help but wonder if the game would have had slightly more impact if Luke was just a previous owner of the game like Casey, and you, the player, are finding the uploaded version of this floppy disk that he once had. Since for a majority of the game it really feels like the scribes are talking directly to you, the player, and accessing your computer's files for boss fights. It feels a little jarring when Luke is called out directly in Act 3 when his webcam gets turned on. But maybe if there was another layer here, it would be getting too meta, so I can't firmly say the game would be better with my suggestion. Something I want to nitpick a little is it felt like Luke's story couldn't decide between a haunted object that drives the person to insanity or an evil company conspiracy horror mystery. Because in these tapes that take place presumably before Luke is killed at the end of the game, we can hear someone attempting to break into his house, but he's fine later on. And here he has like an exact replica of Leshy's scale. Like he went to a bunch of thrift stores or something and wouldn't come home until he got the exact scale from the game. So presumably he's completely lost his mind. But then he still goes on to competently beat the game and call up a private investigator about what's been happening.
Yes, thank you so much for getting back to me.
No problem.
So who was breaking into his house in the middle of the night then? Why did he go insane if really the only bad thing about the game is the old data files, which he didn't even see until the very end? It's like the creator wanted the game to be haunted, but like, not haunted enough to matter that much. Because I guess if it weren't for the old data files, Luke would have been fine after beating the game.
And here I'll add some crazy VFX with like...
I realize this nitpick section has gone on really long, so let me reiterate that I liked the Luke Carter inclusion. It added pretty much the entire mystery element to the game. It wasn't poorly executed at all, but it was just maybe trying to fit in all the haunted game tropes at once. Moving on to Act 2. Act 2 is just what the digital version of Inscryption is supposed to be. I don't have a ton to say about it other than it's a pretty solid game, and I feel like I made the wrong choices. Specifically, I picked the Mage starting deck, and the Mage cards ended up being my least favorite out of all of them because of how much board space needs to be taken up just to play other cards. I also picked PO3 as the scribe to replace, so when he took over the game for Act 3, that led me to falsely believing that any of the scribes could take over for Act 3. I found out later that wasn't true, and PO3 takes over regardless, and I was slightly disappointed only because I happened to make that choice. Also, I don't know whether it's pronounced PO3 or PO, so I'm going to be interchanging them for the rest of this video. Besides that, the chapter kind of loses all the horror elements that were present before. I think it's appropriate given the circumstances. This is the vanilla way the game is supposed to be without having been messed with, so it makes sense for that purpose. But the scribes are far more aware of their position in the game than they should be, and are actually able to take control of the entire game given the correct circumstances. Leshy seems a lot more mellow than he was in Act 1, though it seems he and the others have full memory of what happened before, despite the game being reset. This adds to the fourth wall element, but now just makes them seem more like sentient characters rather than a threat. The whole act feels like its own adventure, and the environment of the scribes are all unique from one another. Each scribe has different mechanics that makes it difficult to defeat them, and their underlings all have individual personalities now, which led to some funny moments, especially from Magnificus's minions. It was also cool to see items and characters with full context that were only hinted at in Act 1. It's also just so creative to switch game genres like this, but keeping the core of the experience present. Act 1 inadvertently acts as a tutorial for Act 2. It teaches you how to play and respond to all of this without you realizing it. There's a bit of a learning curve if you pick the mage or the technology decks to start out with, but they're easy to learn enough as well. For the gameplay, you have a lot more freedom with your deck, as it can now be edited at any time. You can purchase packs of any scribe type and have more dominance with either beasts, technology, gems, or the undead. I personally think the Beast and Undead cards are the most obvious to pair and have the most synergy with each other. After completing the admittedly challenging boss encounters, you reach the end of Act 2. As I've stated, I picked Poe as the scribe to replace, since the game was hinting that he had ulterior motives, but I failed to see that him taking over was his plan the whole time. Either way, the transition to Act 3 was still surprising and very effective. For me, it was a pleasant surprise to return to this kind of format. There's a slight return to the horror genre with the dark, dingy lab environment and PO3 having you cuffed to the table, but the feeling quickly disintegrates once you realize death isn't a consequence anymore. It instead uses a checkpoint system, and as for getting up from your chair, Poe allows you to do it just to check on one machine, but then continues to let you get up as much as you want afterwards. While the environment is a different vibe than Act 1, I still appreciate how it ends up being an extension of the scribe's personality. Leshy was really into the atmosphere of the game, but PO3 is pretty much the exact opposite. Everything he says about the gameplay is hilariously dry. He really only gets into character for boss encounters, and only because he literally loads a program of that boss's personality. Though I wasn't a fan of the new cyber art style of the cards, I think this was the most fluid moving section of the game. Everything snaps into place and encounters move at a good pace. In terms of gameplay, I enjoy almost everything that was added in this act. My favorites being the additional lane, the empty vessel continuously getting stronger as you progress, and the sniper mechanic, even though the sniper sigil is admittedly pretty broken. I also enjoyed how you could create custom cards and share them. My favorite one I named was the Help Boy, and I love him because he wasn't very helpful, but he was definitely trying his best. Nothing tops the boss battles though. They were all tons of fun, and it was invigorating to encounter more fourth wall breaks that still somehow surprised me, especially with the boss where you gamble with your own computer files. I find it a strange coincidence that Luke Carter has the exact same files in Steam Friends as me. What wasn't as good was permanently sacrificing my cards at certain points. While there's a clear cost and benefit here, it just really feels like it was limiting your potential synergies with all your cards, whereas in Act 2 you could edit your deck as much as you wanted. Though it was likely designed this way because of all the crazy new sigils added in this act. Coming closer to the conclusion, you join the other scribes in a plan to stop Poe's Great Transcendence. The plan being just keep playing until Leshy sneak attacks him, and that's what he does. He just walks up behind him and just rips his head off. I enjoyed the plot twist with what the Great Transcendence really is. First, because it was clever how giving PO3 access to your computer helped him finish and start to upload Inscryption. Second, because all of the scribes' motivations are essentially just to control the game themselves. All they want to do is play the game. With retrospect, I theorize that the scribes were created with this insatiable urge to continue playing the game just to reduce the odds of the old data files being found. Though it seems like Remora, the scribe of death, was self-aware enough to realize that the endless cycle wasn't a good thing. I'm really glad we got to see what the game looks like when facing the other scribes. While I would have definitely liked for Grimoire or Magnificus to be fully in the game, it probably would have become monotonous at some point. It was sad to watch them disappear in front of you, especially Leshy. I liked how through this strange journey you wind up in the same position in front of him as you were in the beginning of the game, though now with a new, sadder perspective. Though he first came off as definitely unsettling and probably committed murder with the camera, he really perceived being turned into a card an honor, and all he really wanted to do was play this game. So Leshy's handshake and send-off was definitely the highlight of the whole game for me. As I segue into my conclusion, I want to finally point out what I've been hesitating to point out this whole video, because I would have been saying it so frequently it would have gotten annoying. The music is fantastic, the entire time. just really love how I can keep playing this game and not get bored of it. It's an enticing roguelike for me. It's simple, it's eerie, and it's unique. A typical indie game in the horror genre, like other ones I've reviewed on my channel, can really only be fully enjoyed on a first playthrough. But with all of the hidden clues here, the secrets, the Easter eggs, the mystique, and the gameplay loop, Inscryption offers so much more. I'm giving this game my first 5 out of 5. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a like on your way out, and subscribe for more Midnight Lab content.